In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. A reading from the book of Genesis, chapter 32, verses from 26 onwards. Then he said, "Let me go, for the day has broken." But Jacob said, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." And he said to him, "What is your name?" And he said, "Jacob." Then he said, "Your name shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, for you have striven with God and with men and have prevailed." Good afternoon, my dear fathers, brothers, and sisters. This afternoon, we are going to reflect with the character of Jacob. Let me share the screen with you. Good. The title for this afternoon's conference is Jacob from Duplicity to Integrity, Journeying Towards Inner Freedom. This morning, we saw Jesus as the founder or embodiment of inner freedom. Actually, we didn't establish towards the end how Jesus becomes the embodiment. We left with saying 4 layers of our life: physical, intellectual, emotional or affective, and spiritual. And say that at these 4 levels, we need to enjoy inner freedom. And how Jesus becomes the embodiment of inner freedom in the sense. In the Gospels, we see Jesus being portrayed as a free person, and that freedom is found in Jesus in all his interactions. So that way we can say Jesus was the embodiment of freedom. Now, from this afternoon, we'll be taking different characters from both the First Testament and the Second Testament, and we'll try to see how these people journey towards inner freedom or journey towards different facets of inner freedom. This afternoon, we have one patriarch, Jacob. This is a story of a patriarch. Here we are going to see how to resolve the conflict between conscience and success. We all want to be successful and we all want to be moral. In the sense, moral or ethically disciplined or ethically effective. How do we bridge the gap between these two? For example, we all work at these 2 levels. In the sense, work at the level of success in the sense, suppose I am here or I am appointed in a school or a parish, and I want to be a successful parish priest, and I compare myself with my companions, and I try to establish myself as a good, effective, and efficient parish priest. And on the other side, there is a struggle in me in the sense, like I want to be free, I want to spend time for myself, I want to read a book that I purchased long ago, I want to watch something which is a very good movie, or I want to talk to my friend in a private place, or I want to go out on a picnic. So this happens. So both are important. So one side, we want to be efficient and that is successful. And on the other side, just we want to do what really our heart wants us to do. So when we try to have these 2 elements together, often we are led to duplicity. So today, this afternoon, we are going to discuss how Jacob handles this duplicity in his life, or how far we can go with duplicity, or can we rename duplicity as dichotomy? Can we really live with dichotomy? These will be the questions we'll be asking this afternoon. The story of Jacob unfolds in 11 episodes as portrayed in Genesis. Number 1, birth of Jacob. And it's very interesting to note that only very few persons are portrayed from their birth to death. I think Jacob is unique in the sense Jacob's birth story is there, Jacob's childhood is there, youth and love, marriage life is there, old age, death, everything we have. But suppose we take Abraham. Abraham's birth narrative we don't have. Isaac's birth narrative we have, but about his childhood we don't have much narrative. And coming to Samson, Samson's birth narrative is there and young age is there, but old age is not because he dies young. David's young age is there, but David's birth is not there. So it's very rare that personalities in the Bible are portrayed from their childhood or from their conception to their death. And it is Jacob who has undergone all the stages of life. So that way Jacob stands as a unique person. The text says that Isaac was 40 years old when he married Rebekah, and 60 years when sons were born to Rebekah and Isaac. So for 20 years, Rebekah is barren. And Rebekah receives a message from God. And that message we do not know. And the message is reserved to her alone. And she hides it from Isaac. But the message is clear when she loves Jacob more. So she loves Jacob more than she loves Esau. So here, in the birth of Jacob itself, there is a duplicity in the sense, duplicity in terms of Rebekah is favored by God, but that favor is not shown to or is not revealed to Isaac. And coming to the second level, Rebekah loves Jacob more than she loves Esau. Again, there is a duplicity in the sense, one person is loved more and another person is loved less. So already the story creates a curiosity to know what will happen in the end. And there are two persons in the womb of Rebekah, Esau and Jacob. And these two persons will be fighting with one another or they will be in reconciliation. So the reader is curious. Coming to the second episode where Jacob buys Esau's birthright. Here, Esau, we know the story. Esau comes home late and he is very hungry. Jacob is making a porridge or making a soup. And Esau, since he is hungry, he wants to have some porridge or soup from Jacob's bowl. And Jacob takes advantage of the situation and he tries to buy the birthright of Esau. And Esau here, in a way, he tells that what I'm going to do with my birthright if I'm going to die. So he thinks that physical hunger is satisfying the physical hunger is more important than owning the birthright. Already that seems like how Esau was very simple or very unintelligent that side. And on the other hand, this story also shows how Jacob was very cunning to take advantage of a situation. So here how Jacob exercises his duplicity in the sense, one side, Jacob takes advantage of the situation. Another side, this duplicity becomes a literary necessity. Literary necessity in the sense, Jacob will receive the blessings from his father shortly. And in a way, the author wants us to tell us that Jacob really was the firstborn because he has bought birthright from Esau. So he has not cheated his father. So that way, to justify Jacob's act later, so the author makes this situation earlier. That is, Esau gives his birthright to Jacob on his own. So this is a literary element there that to note. But for the time being, let's understand that Jacob takes advantage of the situation. And Jacob, in a way, he exploits his elder brother. Episode 3, Jacob cheats on Isaac. This is a very interesting story. Look at the economy of words. Economy of words in the sense how the author, the biblical author, makes use of very little words to communicate very big meaning. Let us begin with this. My father. So this is my father. Jacob is addressing Isaac. And the context of the story is Isaac is getting old and he has to bless his sons before he dies. And he tells Esau, the eldest one, to prepare a good catch for him and that after eating, he would bless him. Usually in the Jewish custom, it was that before imparting a blessing on anyone, your stomach is full. So even in our own culture also we have. That's why in our wedding celebrations, so there, before blessing the marriage, we give all the invitees a good dinner, a good lunch, so that they are able to bless the couple. They are able to bless the couple once their stomach is full. So that, like, you are full, and that way Isaac also wants to have his stomach filled. And here my father Jacob calls Isaac, and Isaac tells, "Here I am. Who are you, my son?" So here I am. It's like any other. Suppose somebody calls you. It's an ordinary way of saying, "Here I am." In Hebrew, it is Hineni. Who are you? My son. Here, who are you? The question is curious in the sense, already the father Isaac is expecting Esau, the firstborn, but the voice looks that of Jacob. So already Isaac is a little disturbed. That's why he's asking, "Who are you?" Otherwise, he would have just direct away said, "My son," because he was expecting Esau. So Isaac is expecting Esau, but voice is that of Jacob. That's why he's curious, and that's why he asks, "Who are you?" And how Jacob manipulates the situation: "I am Esau, your firstborn. I have done as you told me. Now sit up and eat of my game, so that you may bless me." Here, "I am Esau." So this is the first lie Jacob is telling. He's supposed to be, "I am Jacob," but he's telling, "I am Esau, your firstborn." So this could be justified based on the previous episode where Esau sold his birthright to his brother. Sorry, where Jacob sold his birthright. Jacob got the birthright from Esau. "I have done as you told me." Actually, father told Esau to prepare, but Jacob is coming because of Rebekah. So again, is a second lie. "Now sit up and eat of my game." So here, game could mean two things. One could mean hunting, or it could mean the game he is going to play shortly. That is, he is going to cheat his father, "so that you may bless me." So this is literally taken from the Isaac's words. And look at the word economy of words. Like they say, our speech should be as we go for a visa interview. Suppose we have an experience with the US embassy or any other embassy, we know how valuable the words are, because depending on the use of our words, we are either granted a visa or denied a visa. Oftentimes it happens that due to our lack of economy of words, often we have tendency to say more. I think here we could learn for our life also to use the economy of words, the sense to use only the necessary words. And Jacob is very careful in selecting the words. Then Isaac is asking, "How come you came very early?" And Jacob is again telling another lie: "The Lord your God granted me success." So here Jacob is putting another trap. See, suppose somebody is very old and elderly, and that person is usually taken in when the name of the Lord is said. This happens in the story of David also. David is on his deathbed, about to die or in his old age, and there Bathsheba comes. Bathsheba comes and tells that you promised in the name of your God that Solomon would become a king. But David in his lifetime never promised, and never promised in God's name. But Bathsheba, how she manipulates the situation there, the Lord your God means you promised in the name of Lord your God. Again here, to distract Isaac from recognizing who he is, Jacob cunningly says that the Lord your God. He takes the name of God so that Isaac will be distracted. Then the voice is Jacob's voice. The voice is Jacob's voice, but the hands are the hands of Esau. So Isaac is able to identify more or less, voice is Jacob's voice, but the hands are the hands of Esau. So this is the duplicity we have. Jacob has one voice, but the hands, because Rebekah helped him to dress like Esau so that his father could be cheated easily. bless me. So here the story with Jacob ends. Here, actually, oftentimes in our own life, we tend to have two lives. Like the voice is Jacob's voice, but the hands are the hands of Esau. In the sense, suppose I am managing my parish account and I have to show my account to my archbishop. And what I say, I have one account on the note, but I have another account which is known only to me or to my auditor. So there, usually the archbishop will find out, or any person who is in authority will find out. In the sense, the voice is Jacob's voice, but the hands are the hands of Esau. In the sense, there is certain element of duplicity. So whatever may be, like I may preach a good homily in the mass, but I may live a completely different life. So easily people will say, the voice is one thing, but his life is another. So this duplicity, anybody will easily notice. Oftentimes we think that our duplicity will not be noticed. But here, Jacob's duplicity is noted by Isaac, but Isaac is generous, or Isaac in a way yields to the situation. Then comes the second part of the story. Esau comes and says, bless me, me also, father. And Isaac has no blessing, unfortunately. And Esau is telling, he took away my birthright and took away my blessings. So this is more or like a consequence. Like the first one happened, cause and effect. So what is the cause? First one, he took the birthright and took away my blessings. So more or less, Esau here mourns over his own vulnerable, fragile, or manipulated situation. Now our question, we have a question. Who is responsible for Esau's cry? Is it Jacob or Rebekah, Isaac or Esau himself? Or some people also say it is God who is responsible. But we do not know. The story continues. Let's go to the next episode. In the fourth episode, Jacob flees from his father. Here, look at the politics played by Rebekah. Rebekah tells, until he forgets, that is Esau forgets what you have done to him. See here how Rebekah, a woman, a mother, who took initiative that his son would be blessed, maybe because that was the one that she was told by the Lord when she had conceived. And now she manipulates the situation, or she, in a way, does not take responsibility for the situation. In a sense, she tells Jacob, maybe must be a little boy, you have done to him. So Jacob must have got the shock of his life, because Jacob for the first time feels the duplicity of his own mother. So once you play with duplicity, duplicity is paid back to you. Because Rebekah, who instigated Jacob to cheat his brother Esau, now she tells, you have done this to him. So that is the duplicity or politics from Rebekah. And another thing here we have, until he forgets. So here, memory and loss of memory as hermeneutical keys. So in a biblical understanding, here memory plays a memory or loss of memory. So Jacob remembers, Esau remembers, but later Jacob will remember and Esau will forget. So that is how the story is going to move. And that's why Rebekah uses the word forgetting. And here also we can learn loss of memory is actually good for health. Oftentimes we tend to say that I forget this, I forget that. I think our mind is intelligent. It knows what to retain and what to forget. And that way it makes our life peaceful. And time also makes us forget things. And that way we are more blessed when we are able to forget many bad things that happened to us. And now Esau has to forget that bad thing that happened to him. That's the fourth episode. Coming to the fifth episode, Jacob is running away from his brother. He's going on his way towards his maternal uncle Laban, that is Rebekah's brother. And on the way, that is a night that might have been a very long journey for Jacob. And one night he sleeps. And here he sleeps by keeping a pillow. What is that pillow? He keeps a stone as a pillow. Many scholars say that pillow refers to, or the stone that he is using is guilt. Oftentimes, guilt is actually like a stone. It becomes, it's a frozen thing, and it does not allow us to have any peace of mind. And suppose we were to sleep every day with a stone on under our head, how painful it would be. So, but for Jacob, he could undergo this pain because pain inside was heavier than this. And again, duplicity in the sense pain outside and pain inside. And another thing very interesting to note is first time Jacob is alone in his life here. In mother's womb, he was with Esau. In Isaac's house, he was with Esau. In Isaac's blessing episode, he was with Esau. But for the first time, he is alone in his life. So Jacob, for the first time, he is alone in his life. And there he identifies that I know that I am with you. So God is revealing to him, I am with you. So this happens in our own lives as well. When we feel the loneliest, that day God reveals that he is with us. And that is a blessing for us. Oftentimes we tend to identify ourselves with people, or how many people they are around me, or how big a crowd, how big a community that is around me. But actually in the loneliness of our life, it is revealed that God is always there for us. God is always with us. And in this episode, Jacob identifies, surely the Lord is in this place. I did not know it. So even with the characters like Saul and Samson, they also did not know that the Lord was with them. Oftentimes it may happen to us also, that oftentimes we don't know that God is with us. But here, Jacob is not completely liberated. One way he feels the presence of God in his life. On the other hand, he makes a business relationship with God, in the sense, he makes a conditional statement. If God be with me, I will give you 1/10, that you have to give me whatever you have promised. So here, he is encountering God for the first time, but Jacob is making a conditional relationship with God. So Jacob is not at all completely liberated. So partially he is liberated at this experience. So this duplicity is still to be made into integrity. Then let's go to the sixth episode. Jacob meets Rachel. Here in Rachel in Hebrew, here Jacob comes to a well. So in Bible, whenever men come to well, there is going to be a marriage. That is called type scene in narrative analysis. Abraham's servant comes to a well, there is a marriage of Isaac. Jacob comes to the well, so Jacob will be soon married. Moses encounters his future wife at the well. Saul does not come nearly to the well, but Saul encounters the women who were carrying water, and that way water well. So from there we can say Saul also going to be the king of Israel, means the new king entering into the marriage with Israel. Then Jesus and Samaritan woman, Jesus as the bridegroom, and the Samaritan woman, the entire Samaritan village as the bride. So Jesus comes as the new bridegroom. So that's why John also takes this particular type scene and develops this narrative, Jesus and Samaritan woman. And here, Jacob comes to the well, and there some strangers are there. And the first word he tells is, my brothers, where do you come from? Look at the irony here. Jacob flees his brother, but calls everyone else as brothers, that is insecurity. Oftentimes it happens in our own community. Like in our community, our sisters may be there, but we will not have any relationship with them. But instead, we want to have relationship with our ministry place. So there, reaching out to them, we will call everyone as brother and sister without identifying the brother and sister in our own community. And Jacob, in a way, that he feels alienated from his own brother, and to control that alienation or to, in a way, foil that alienation, he tries to play secure with the strangers, and he calls them, maybe also for a manipulating reason also it could be. Then Rachel coming with the sheep, and here women as working, we are able to see in the Song of Songs also, women are working. And Rachel is taking Jacob to Laban's house, and there Laban welcomes with the same words of Adam, you are my bone and my flesh. So Jacob is welcomed at his maternal uncle's place. Then, next episode, Jacob loved Rachel. Jacob identifies his soulmate in Rachel. In the sense, in the Greek, according to Greek mythology, it is said that once when we were created, we had 2 heads, 4 hands, 4 feet, and gods of that time, they were jealous of us that human beings are very strong, so they cut away and we are looking for soulmates. And Jacob, in a way, finds the soulmate, finds the love of his life, and he works for that. But what happens in the sense, he experiences again duplicity there. There is a elder sister to Rachel, Leah. Leah's eyes were lovely, and Rachel was graceful and beautiful. And Jacob is encountering here duplicity. Here, what is this you have done to me? Why then have you deceived me? So here, actually, the marriage happens between Jacob and Rachel in the morning. But at night, when Jacob has to embrace his new wife, what happens? Laban, instead of sending Rachel, sends Leah. And often it surprises us how come that Jacob, who loved Rachel very much, did not able or was not able to make sense that who was there really on the card. And it's very strange, but Jacob could not find out that it was Leah. And in the morning he tells, what is this you have done to me? Why then have you deceived me? And Laban beautifully says, this is not done in our country, giving the younger one before the firstborn. When Laban said this, Jacob might have got the shock of his life. In the sense, this is not done in our country, but this could be done in your country, where when the elder one is there, the younger one may get the blessing. But in our country, it is not so. When the elder one is there, the younger one is not given in marriage. And these words struck Jacob very much. So whenever he saw Leah, these words were ringing in his mind, and he began to hate Leah. Oftentimes it happens in our own lives as well. Like if somebody were to remind of our past, remind of our failure, remind of our guilt, we constantly, that person reminds us, then that tends to create in us a kind of a bad memory, and we tend to get irritated with that person, and that person we can't really stand. So same way, Leah is unloved by Jacob. But God favors Leah, and Leah bears children. And Rachel is asking, give me children or I shall die. Here Jacob is telling, am I in the place of God? But here, indirectly, so far, Jacob was playing God in his life, in the sense trying to manipulate every situation. But now Jacob ironically says that, am I in the place of God? Then the story continues, and Laban exploits Jacob. Jacob's hard work. Jacob's a very hardworking person. And one day, Jacob decides to leave because his maternal uncle, now father-in-law, is not leaving. So Jacob flees. Yet your father has cheated me, but God did not permit him to harm me. So this is the word. With these words, Jacob addresses Rachel. And Rachel also stole household gods. Maybe on account of household gods were golden statues, or we could also say in Jacob's time still polytheism was prevalent and monotheism had not taken its course. And take heed that you say not a word to Jacob, either good or bad. So Laban is encountered by God and warned with these words. And Laban establishes a covenant with Jacob. God is witness between you and me. Jacob sees God's angels there, and that place is called Mahanaim. So Jacob has 3 God experiences. First one at Bethel, when he was alone. Now at Mahanaim, that is another place, where now he is with Laban and with his own family and flock. So all are here. So this is again second God experience. But only the third God experience changes him completely. The next episode, Jacob is traveling, and now they have to travel very slow because women are there, children are there, flock, cattle, everything is there. So they are traveling very slow. And meanwhile, it is told Jacob that Esau is living somewhere this side, and he may take revenge on you. And Jacob now seeks a shortcut. In the sense, earlier he wanted to bribe God, but now he wants to bribe or gift Esau. So what he does, he prepares a very good gift, maybe in terms of cattle, in terms of maid servants, in terms of slaves. So he makes a gift. But in a way, he's not transformed here. And that night, something beautifully happens. And that is the core of our reflection today. That is episode 10. Jacob wrestles at Peniel, 32:22. This is the reading which we had at the beginning of our session. Jacob wrestles with a stranger. Many scholars have tried to ask who this stranger is. Some say really God was fighting with Jacob. Some say God's angel. Some say it might have been an ordinary human being, and since it was very dark and Jacob couldn't know, because it was earlier, like when they were lying in the desert, in the open fields, easily to take care of or to snatch the cattle or to snatch the wives and women, usually they would fight. So such a fight would have happened, some say. But the best possible interpretation could be this wrestling happens in Jacob's conscience. In Jacob's heart it happens. So actually, Jacob wrestles, that wrestling is an internal struggle. Internal struggle between what? Jacob is struggling all night between what? Whether to cheat Esau or to reconcile with him. Whether to play games with Esau again or to embrace him as his brother. Whether to yield to duplicity or to embrace integrity. And finally, Jacob comes out as a beautiful person. Duplicity turns out to be integrity. Jacob says no at a particular moment of time, that I will not cheat my brother. I will not be a person of duplicity. And there something beautiful happens. He receives a new name. So earlier name, Jacob meant one who deceives, one who is cunning, one who is cheating. But now Israel, one who strives. One who strives in the sense, one who continues to win. Therefore, integrity actually is a continuous struggle to win. Suppose here, I have to admit some 100 students to my college, and I have 100 students there, and I get 100 students fees I have. But I have to now exercise my integrity. My mind says, like, you enter only 50% name and 50% amount you keep for your own travel or whatever you want to buy, you buy. And there, that is duplicity. In the sense, 100 admissions came, but I am writing only 50 here. That is duplicity. But suppose I have to be a person of integrity, what I have to do? I have to stop my mind from inducing me to make this exercise. So that way, constantly I have to struggle, and not only struggle, I have to win in the struggle. So it does not mean that, okay, I had a struggle, but again I write in the account book as 50 admissions. That means what? I have struggled, but I have yielded to the struggle. Jacob did not yield to the struggle. Jacob wins the struggle. So that is the meaning of integrity. So integrity does not mean that I fight with the two things, but integrity means to come out with a better thing. So that is the meaning of one who strives. So not only one who fights, but also continues to strive with which is better. And that is the meaning of Israel. And also here, there is a little also political story, in the sense, some say Israel wanted to have an ideal name, ideal nation, as a nation of integrity. So they create a story, in the sense, we got a name from God himself. So that is an etiological story. And why there is also another etiological story, in the sense that the thigh part, so the messenger or the angel is holding on to the thigh of Jacob, and Jacob becomes a lame person. In a way, he's not able to walk properly, and the people don't eat the thigh even now. So that could be an etiological story. But let us understand here how Jacob's duplicity turns out to be integrity. And from this moment, we see a lot of transformation in Jacob's story that could be very vivid in two things. Number one, Jacob is now settling there, and Jacob has 12 sons and one daughter, and that daughter Dinah is raped. And what happens immediately? Her brothers take revenge. But Jacob does not take revenge at all. Jacob, in a way, scolds his sons who took revenge for that act. And there we are able to see how Jacob is able to be more compassionate. Maybe that compassion could be out of his integrity. That is one instance. Second instance, when Jacob is told by his sons that Joseph was killed by an animal, Jacob just does not react. He accepts the fact, or he does not inquire about whether his sons really play game on him, because he in a way he takes situation as it is. That way, Jacob becomes a mature person after the struggle. And Jacob tells this in a very beautiful way. Jacob is in Egypt in chapters 46 and 47. There, Pharaoh is asking Jacob, Pharaoh of Egypt, how many are the years of your life? And Jacob is telling, the years of my earthly sojourn are 130. Few and hard have been the years of my life. In the sense, very few and hard. So maybe Jacob realizes towards the end, like how he had made his life hard through his duplicity. And he was very humble enough to accept that this is what life has been. And there we see in the person of Jacob a total surrender. A person who wanted to have everything for himself later surrenders completely, not to necessarily to the will of God, but to the fate of life. That is the outcome of integrity. Now let us sum up the entire story, the 11 episodes that we came across. Number one, Jacob's duplicity as a givenness. Givenness in the sense, as far as the story is concerned, he had to be like that because the story moves that way. And that was a natural thing. Some say it is God-willed, or whether it's justifiable, we do not know from moral perspective. But one thing is very clear, Jacob's early life was marked by duplicity. Secondly, Jacob's duplicity turns out to integrity through a God experience. As I said earlier, 3 God experiences. 1 at Bethel, two at Mahanaim, and 3 at Peniel. And Peniel, Peniel means face of God, Penuel or Peniel here. So once when we see the face of God, there is no more duplicity in us, or there can be no more duplicity in us. But only when we see our own face, there is duplicity. And to see the face of God, it takes a struggle. It takes a struggle where we have to fight and come out with victoriously. And that struggle we have to undergo lonely, undergo alone, undergo one at a time, and undergo in night. And that God experience transformed Jacob and may transform us as well. And then Jacob has a mark in his body. So that is something beautiful. Whenever he think of his thigh, he will remember his integrity. That's why in NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, they say, suppose you have made a decision and you want somebody has to remind you of the decision, like you have to have a ring or something. Suppose I say, I have a tendency to watch pornography, suppose we say, and I want to avoid that. So in NLP, what do they say? Okay, you want to avoid that particular bad habit. So what they do, maybe you wear a ring, they say. So whenever I look at the ring, I will remember the promise that I have made to myself that I will not watch this porn content. So that would be a reminder. And here, Jacob has a reminder in his body, a constant reminder that he will be a person of integrity. Then there is a change in his intellect. Change in his intellect in the sense, he comes out of his stereotype. This morning we saw how stereotypes would affect us. So he had a stereotype of his own about Esau. Now he comes out of it. And thirdly, he becomes a new person in his relationship with his brother and with his own family members. There is conversion. And finally, transformation in his spirituality. So he no more makes a bargain or business with God, but he just surrenders to God. That is transformation in his spirituality. That way, Jacob's integrity is revealed in his physical layer, intellectual layer, affective layer, and spiritual layer. Now that is the story of Jacob. Now let us understand our own duplicities. Number one, duplicity could be a deception or a lie. Suppose I say a lie to my superiors or to my archbishop or to my colleagues. There actually I am a person of duplicity, in the sense I tend to deceive other person. Our duplicity could be hypocritical or double dealing. Hypocritical in the sense I am one person inside, I am another person outside. For example, suppose I preach about poverty outside, but inside I tend to have a very rich life. That could be hypocritical. But outside, suppose I say I am a person fighting for social justice, but inside, in my house, in my community, I will not treat each other with respect. So outside, I talk about social justice, but inside, I am treating my own subalterns or in my own subordinates an unjust way. That is hypocritical. That could be double dealing, and that is also that's also a manifestation of duplicity. Thirdly, it could be quality or state of being double or twofold. So in psychology, they say schizophrenic. Schizophrenic is very negative. In a sense, it's a disorder. Like in some movies, they show that person will be one person having two personalities. But we may not have really like this disorder, but we may have a double life, in the sense, like I have my private sphere where I am different, where I have a public sphere, there I am different. So that is a double personality we may tend to live. And finally, intentional deceptiveness, in the sense, intentionally I undertake anything, maybe by my words, by my deeds, I am keen on duplicating myself or deceiving other people. That is intentional deceptiveness. So our duplicity could be of one of these types. And how do we grow in integrity? Number one, discover your inner life. So our inner life would be our clerical, priestly life or our religious life. So what is that core of inner life? So when it comes to inner life, it has my personal promises, personal vows, then my community life and my ministry. So inner life comprises of three things: my personal vowed life, my community life, my ministry life. So we need to identify for these three, what are the values, what are the visions. Suppose poverty, celibacy, obedience. How do I define these values? And what is the vision for my personal life? What is the vision for my community life? What is the vision for my ministry life? Maybe in the case of a diocesan priest like us, it could be a personal life. The vowed life could be our own, the state of being ordained. Our community life would be our commitment to our own diocese. And our ministry could be where we are appointed, either in a parish or an institution. So that could be our ministry. So in all these three places, I need to set my values. Suppose somebody say, this is Father Arok, or this is Father Samson, this is Father Paul Raj. So what is the value with which they will identify me? And what is the vision I am moving towards? So when it is defined in the sense, I set the limit, I set the boundary clearly, then easy to grow in integrity. Thirdly, have your outer life represent your inner life. In the sense, actually our maturity comes in bridging the gap between our private life and public life. Actually, they say we have three lives, every one of us. One is public life. Second one is personal life. Third one is private life. Public life is where I am in front of all people, whether I am at the altar or I am in front of a school assembly or I'm in front of a camera. That's a public life. Personal life is what I am inside, in the room. Maybe for a religious system, it could be in a community. So like I have my own way of living, my own way of being. That is a personal life. Private life is like only I know, God knows, no one else knows. Even my own close friends will not know. Even because if I reveal that, either I will become weak or I will become a person of mockery. So I don't want to reveal that private life secrets to anyone. But in Jesus, suppose we say, there was no gap between private life, public life, personal life. So that integrity is such that Jesus narrowed down the gap. So there was no gap at all between his private life. He was what? He was inside the house, outside the house with the disciples, everywhere same. And that is the sign of integrity. And later, Jacob arrived at that integrity. And that is the step, third step, have your outer life represent your inner life. So finally, it's about connecting you to you. That is integrity. So integrity could be, so this one I took from this particular blog. I like this line. It's about connecting you to you. So duplicity, what does it does? It divides between you and you. It divides between me and me. But integrity connects me between me, as there is it establishes a connection. So actually there is a connection between us, means between me and me. Only because of our duplicity we break that connection. But once we slowly come towards that integrity, I think we'll be able to be a person of inner freedom. So integrity would be a sign of inner freedom. So when I am a person of integrity, naturally I tend to enjoy inner freedom because I have nothing to hide from others, and there is no duplicity in me. And Jacob, as a great patriarch, comes to us as a person who moved from duplicity to integrity. Let us continue to reflect with the story. So when you have time, kindly read the entire cycle, Jacob cycle, and try to, so let's read in our own mother tongue. All the more it makes real meaning to us. And that way, let's try to walk through this character. And let us pray that God may take us from duplicity to integrity. And that does not happen overnight as it happened to Jacob. It may take months, years, and decades, but still the integrity journey is possible. Good. Thank you.